Welcome to Wine Soundtrack South Africa. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world. In 30 answers, discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Morena Kaler, and today I'm sitting with Johnathan Grieve from Avondale. Welcome, Johnathan. Can you tell me a bit about yourself?
So I'm a farmer, a father, a husband, I guess husband first and then a father of two. But most importantly, my passion is farming, and farming naturally, of course.
Yes, you farm organically, biodynamically. I've heard the story, and you are such an amazing storyteller. Tell us about Avondale. Where is it located?
So Avondale is situated in Paarl, just outside Paarl. It's an old estate dating back to 1693, so quite interesting from that perspective. Originally, in the granting papers, it was granted with 200 vineyard stockies, so vines, for wine production, which in those days were almost unheard of. My family bought the farm in 1996, so much more recent history. And it was actually not producing wine anymore, still produced grapes, but sold it off to the local cooperative. And we started uplifting the farm, made our first wines as a family in 99. And at that stage, very much the modern style of winemaking, if you like. Lots of extraction and commercial additives and oak and gold stickers for that matter. But things have changed a lot since then.
Yes, I've been on the farm a few times, and things have definitely changed a lot. So today, how many hectares do you farm, and what is your annual production?
So we do, the total farm is 300 hectares. We have just under 70 hectares under vineyards. A bit of, as a natural farm should be. We have a herd of Black Angus as well, and some ducks and chickens and all sorts of other projects as well. But under vineyards, planting is just under 70 hectares. And our annual production, we get between 350 to 400 tons. So I'm on the farming side. I never understand the bottle side too much, but that's around about our production.
Okay, it's quite big then. Tell me, your wines, what style, what type of wine would you say do you make?
Yeah, so our wines are, firstly, they're all organically certified. We farm completely biodynamically as well, and very much, made in the vineyards. Ultimately, many years ago, as I said, when we started, it was a conventional farm. And we started converting through to firstly organics and then biodynamics in early 2000s, so a fair amount of time ago when it was really uncool to be organic for that matter. I remember distinctly at certain stages saying to people, look here, this is organic wine, and they wouldn't want to taste it. So, that was, a lot has changed since then, put it that way. But ultimately, we focus at the top end of the market. Our wines are very much slow wine. So what I mean by that is we let it give it time to actually ferment, all naturally fermented, all natural wines as such, and really giving it time, not trying to force it, focused on the grape, and very much grape-driven wines. Lots of layers, lots of textures, probably more towards old world in style in that regard, so lots of elegance as well. But ultimately, the whole idea with Avondale is to really capture what our little place in the world, our spot in the sun, in our wines, and each one has a personality, has a story, and really tells the Avondale story in totality.
It's great. Your wines do need to tell your story and represent your philosophies. And I do think your range of wine does exactly that. I know you export a lot of wine outside of the South African borders. Where can our listeners find Avondale's wines?
So we export to around about just under 20 markets now. Main focus is Europe as such, so the greater Europe, a lot into Scandinavia, so Sweden and Finland, Denmark, Norway, as well as Holland and Germany, Switzerland, most of Western Europe, should I say, UK obviously, and then also into Canada. So one or two of the monopolies in Canada, LCBO and SAQ. US in about 20 states at the moment, so fairly small at the moment, but growing nicely, but into on that side.
Okay. I know you export a lot of your wine. Outside of the South African borders, where can our listeners find your wines?
So we export to 20 markets at the moment, with a major focus on Europe. So most of Western Europe, including Scandinavia. Our big markets are Sweden and Finland, Norway, Denmark, UK as well, Holland, and then into Canada. SAQ and LCBO as the main two markets there. US, we're in about 20 states at the moment and growing nicely. And then a little bit into South America and into Asia and the East as well. So mainly Japan, but into China, Singapore, Indonesia.
That's a fairly large geographical footprint, for sure. So, moving on to yourself. Do you have a specific moment in time that you remember drinking maybe your first wine or drinking a wine that kind of was epiphanous in some ways, that kind of made you realize, wow, this is something special?
I think my story with wine is one side slightly different, but it really comes from the growing side, so that's where my real passion lies. But I can say from growing up, my family and specifically my dad always used to love wine. And we always used to sit down as a family and have dinners, basically all our meals. And we used to have lots of debates about various different things and a lot of fun around wine. So my first wine was probably way too young, but that was part of the culture. It was part of what came around. And ultimately it was my father. He grew up on a farm originally, and they left that farm when he was a youngster. And that's his passion was to actually go back to a farm. And that's when we bought Avondale, and he bought it as part of the family, took us there, and the rest is history as such. But those fond memories growing up, and I think that to me is really the culture of wine. It's not necessarily just a bottle, but it's everybody sitting around a table enjoying different bottles of wine, and obviously each one of those wines having a story. So and I guess at the same time making your own stories around the bottle of wine is really important.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of stories, whether we're creating our own stories whilst enjoying a good bottle, or whether the bottle tells a story in itself. Speaking of interesting wines, have you ever had an iconic wine or a wine even that's maybe left an indelible mark on your memory?
Yeah, I think, the list is fairly long as far as that goes. I mean, once again, coming back to the fact that you sit around and experience with a wine, and that is something that really blows me away. But I think the most interesting wine that I've had, and it's once again more of an experience than the wine itself. But Cornet, my winemaker, and myself were traveling through the France and specifically in the Loire Valley. And we met a couple of like-minded producers, and one of them took us into his cellar. And he actually had a white wine that was still fermenting after 2 years. And he took a barrel sample out of this, and we tasted it, and it was just absolutely phenomenal. So it wasn't actually even a finished product. It was still at the tail end of its fermentation, and it was 2 years down the line. So as a natural wine producer, you look at that and say, okay, well, there's something, it tells its own story, it has its own aspect to it, and that was on one side a huge experience, but also a light bulb moment. And you think, well, actually, we often say our wine is a slow wine, and as a protected, especially with the whites, protected ferments, and sometimes it takes up to 9 months to a year to ferment. And everybody looks at you a bit funny, and then you go and taste the wine that's been fermenting for 2 years, and you're like, okay, well, we're not that bad from that perspective. But just the textures and the layers and everything that comes with that was incredible.
That's really interesting. I've never actually heard of a wine fermenting for 2 years. It's really super interesting stuff. So you've travelled extensively abroad, and I'm sure visited many, many wineries. Are there any wineries still on your bucket list that you still want to go and see and experience?
I think definitely, of course. I think that once you stop exploring, then there's something wrong. Then hopefully you did. But definitely, maybe not different wineries, but definitely regions and countries that I would love to go see. And I think each one of those, probably I'm more inclined towards the old world as such, and maybe the extra old world. So maybe to a degree Georgia, but even the countries around that area and around the Black Sea, I think would be exceptionally interesting. And obviously, hopefully, once war has stopped happening there, but it's those sort of the historical side of wine, I think, is so interesting. Especially, we use various different clay vessels in the farm, and we've actually gone over to Georgia and sourced them from that side. So using those vessels and how it fits into our modern winemaking practices sort of really intrigues me and interests me.
Yeah, I love the Quevery that you have on Avondale. It's an interesting story, and hearing about the process of how they make those, and to understand the history behind it is really very intriguing. So tell me about Avondale's wines. What is the most expensive wine that you have on your wine list?
Well, that's always an interesting question to start off with. So our for lack of a better word, our flagship is a wine called Novitas. Novitas is a Rhone blend, so it's a blend driven by Syrah with some Grenache and Mourvedre. It's probably the most unlike flagship wine that you'll find from a perspective. Normally, wineries, most expensive wine is the most extracted, the most oak, the most, the biggest wine as such. And Novitas is not like that. Novitas means energy in Latin. And obviously the way that we farm with the biodynamics, with the natural farming, is all about energy. It's all about rhythms. And this wine is really about that. It's capturing the essence of the grape, the essence of Avondale. Lots of layers, lots of elegance, lots of structure. But very much grape-driven. And at the moment, we're selling a 13-year-old vintage, which is our current vintage. So it's also a great example of the slow winemaking process that we're after. And really just a huge expression. I mean, it's one of those wines where a friend of mine once said to me, he said, no, I love this wine so much. He said, I can just take the bottle and go sit under a tree with a glass and drink it by myself. And that was such a, number one, a compliment, but more importantly, it's sort of indicative of the wine. It really intrigues you, and when you give it a bit of time and have it with food and have it with friends, it will really reward as well.
Yeah, it's nice finding something that just makes you happy and can take away a day's worth of worries and hassles just in one glass. Do you believe in a perfect variety? Do you think there is such a thing?
I wouldn't say there's a perfect variety. I mean, for us at Avondale, we've actually got 2 single varietals that we do, and then we do pretty much blends. So if anything, I would be more inclined to go for the blends. And ultimately, even our single varietals, so for argument's sake, our Nima, which is a Chenin Blanc, we have 13 different types of soil on the farm, and our whole farm is planted according to these soil types. So small blocks, managed completely separately, all spontaneous ferments, all aged separately. So at the end of the day, we've got 16 different blocks of Chenin Blanc. Basically, yes, same cultivar, but all different clones, all different soils, all vinified separately, and then right at the end we start blending it all together. So even though it's a single varietal, it's actually much more than just a single varietal. And it's the same with the blends. I do think personally, on the white side, I definitely love a Chenin, so that's why I probably use it as an example. I think overall it's a beautiful drinking cultivar. You have everything from cheap and cheerful Chenins to incredible Chenins, through from dry to sweet to everything in between. So it's very versatile. And what I love about a Chenin as well is you can add a bit of oak to it. You can age it really well. That really goes well with aging. And then obviously coming into food, it really stands on its own. So I've got lots of time for Chenin.
I have to echo your sentiments there. I think Chenin is certainly one of the most versatile grapes that we have. As you say, it can be very light and fruity, all the way through to a beautifully wooded style wine, and even a lovely cup classique thrown in between. But when it comes to food, you can have a hell of a lot of fun with a good Chenin Blanc. So I must agree with you on that one. Tell me, Johnathan, what is your opinion on wine critics and scores and competitions?
Jeez, you should never have asked me that. Look, yeah, I mean, it's a ongoing debate for me and my team. Ultimately, we don't ascribe to many, so we're not writing into lots of competitions. I guess there's definitely room for it, and it does give the consumer a sort of a benchmark of a wine which they might never have tasted before, never come across. What I don't like about competitions as a whole, and to a degree critics and that type of thing, but specifically competitions, is that you've got a flight of wines that that competition, those tasters will go through 50 to 100 wines in a very short period, and it's the wines that are made to stand out that stand out. So those bombs and there's a recipe. If we look at, I mentioned right up front, we used to make those wines with the extraction, with the oak, with the everything else that goes with that. So when you come to the glass, it jumps out of the glass. It's almost like a sledgehammer and knocks you on the nose, and off you go. There's a recipe for it, and lots of people do that. For us, it's not what Avondale's about. Avondale's about creating elegant wines and wines that showcase where they come from. If we're whacking it with oak and working the hell out of it, extracting it, adding enzymes, I'm making a very generic product then, which, yes, it might win me prizes and awards, but it's not what we are. It's not true to Avondale. Our wines are much more layered, much more textured, much more elegant, and specifically when you taste them, have them with food, they will reward you for that. So they will show their different layers. And we've experienced where you put it in a competition where, a taster might spend a minute or two. If you're lucky, it might be 2 minutes on the wine. They just don't get the depth of our style of wine. Whereas obviously the counter argument is the sledgehammer that comes through. So that's why we're not that keen on ratings and things. There is, as I said, method in the madness. If you can get a great rating and you can put that on social media and so on, it is beneficial in certain circles and certain markets specifically. So I mean, a lot of your American markets and Canadian markets where they're monopolies, they don't even look at wines without awards. So, there's a whole industry around that in its own right, which I don't necessarily think is correct, but if you're wanting to get in there, you need some sort of external tick next to your wine that's saying, look, yeah, actually this wine is a 90 plus point. But yeah, I'm not the best one to talk to about awards.
Fair enough. As a consumer, what do you enjoy drinking? Red wine, rosé, Cap Classique?
Yeah, that's always a difficult question. If you speak to any of my staff, they'll tell you that my favorite wine is our Miller, which is a Method Cap Classique. So, I always joke I can start the weekend on it and I can end the weekend on it. So I really enjoy that. But then it depends on what we are eating. If we're having a braai, if we're having a sit-down meal, what we're having. If we're having a fish braai with something, then I'm going to choose something quite different as opposed to a piece of steak or a potjie or whatever the story might be. So it really does depend what we eat, and we'll chop and change according to that. What I do like is wines that intrigue me. So wines that have layers, and coming back to your previous question about the show wines, very often to me a show wine will either completely dominate a food, whereas an elegant wine will work with food, and that's what I'm after. I'm after a wine that you can sit down, works with whatever dish you're having, and will show the dish off as well as the food will show the wine off and sort of evolve, and the more you eat and the more you drink, the better it gets almost. So that's what I'm after ultimately.
Fair enough. You have a stunning restaurant on your farm called Faber, and it's very much farm to table, all organic. Speaking of food and wine pairing, do you have a philosophy around that? Is there a recipe that white wine should be served with white meat or fish and red wine only with red meat? Do you enjoy playing with that kind of thing?
Absolutely. I think, look, yeah, there are rough rules about it that you can work with very conventionally. We tend to throw a lot of that out of the window. And I guess a bit like our wines as well, a lot of the conventional methodologies and so on that goes into the growing and the winemaking, everything goes out of the window. So Faber wouldn't be any different to that. But I think also coming back to the fact that elegant wines tend to be able to get paired with a lot of different dishes. And then with the same sentence, the elegant food also can be. So it sort of goes hand in hand. And Faber's food is very much about the ingredient and showcasing the ingredient. So, if you're having a tomato, you want to be seeing to out of a tomato, and it should taste like a beautiful tomato. It should be tasting like the best possible tomato, as an example. And then you can start pairing different wines and different sort of experiences around that. But definitely not, white with fish and this you know what I mean. It's more about the elegance of the wine. For argument's sake, our Quevri, our red, is a very light styled red, so that can go with a whole lot of dishes that you would definitely not normally pair a red wine with. And likewise, there's something like a Cyclist, which is a 5-way white blend. I often joke with sommeliers across some of the best restaurants in the world. I say to them, if you're not sure what wine to put with a dish, just try the Cyclist, because it's so bold yet so elegant. And that's the tension. The other big thing with wine pairing for me is the natural acidity in a wine. If you have natural acidity, it's very much integrated, and you need a beautiful integrated acidity for good food pairing. And it doesn't really matter if it's a very simple dish or a very rich dish. You still need that beautiful acidity to really highlight the wine and the dish, both of them. So
yeah, I think the secret is in having fun with whatever it is that you do. And as the results at the end, if it works really well, that's just a bonus. I'm being assumptive here. I'm assuming that you might have had the odd occasion where you may have overindulged a little bit in wine. Do you have a hangover cure?
Yeah. I've definitely had too many of those occasions. And unfortunately, since I was a youngster, I had a very bad liver. So I'm one of those people who, when I have a hangover, I have a proper hangover. And my wife will attest to that. But I, of course, head towards the natural side of things. So lots of water, but more importantly, milk thistle, and a couple of vitamins that go with that. So that is my go-to. If I know that I'm going to have a humdinger in the night, I'll start early. So even before we go out, have one or two of the tablets when I get back, and the next morning I'm good to go. So yeah, that's definitely my cocktail, if you like.
I'm going to have to stock up on milk thistle then. It sounds like worth trying. What does a non-drinker lose out by not tasting your wine?
Yeah, I mean, we go from one extreme to the next. So a cure for a hangover to a non-drinker who would miss out. And I think the beauty of wine is not just about the wine. It's that's what I love about the industry that we're in. It's the stories that go with the wine. It's the stories that the wine is telling. So its provenance, how it's produced, both in the vineyards, on the farm, the actual place that it comes from, and then also the stories that you make with that wine. So while you're enjoying it, with the people that you're enjoying it, and everything that goes around that experience. And I think, to me, that's what somebody who doesn't drink misses out on. It's not about the actual alcohol in the bottle of wine. It's more about the total experience around it.
So do you have any good luck rituals just as harvest is about to start? Anything that you do, anything that you do with your team?
Yeah, so it's actually an interesting thing. I mentioned just now one of my favorite wines is our bubbly. So, of course, the first grapes that we harvest in the season is the Chardonnay for our bubbly, being that it's harvested quite a bit lower sugar than a normal still wine. So we've been doing since one of the first vintages. We do a first day of harvest with my whole family. So I have a rather large family, some friends, and the whole Avondale family. So all the staff, everybody that's involved in the farm, come together early in the morning. We go out, hand harvest our Chardonnay, bring it into the cellar. We have an old family priest who's almost as old as the farm, and he comes in and blesses the harvest. Last year or this year, I think it was his 22nd harvest that he blessed. So almost from the beginning for us, and he blesses it. We load the press up, and we start pressing, taste the first juice, and then we all go up and have a breakfast together. So it's a great combination of giving thanks on one side, but it's a great experience. It's a great way to bring the whole team. You've grown it for the whole season, getting everybody together, and just taking a pause before you really get stuck into harvest. And of course, later on that goes into the bubbly, and a lot of our bubbly, or all our bubbly, we make wine, gets aged for 7 years. So you only get to taste that in 7 years' time, which is also quite a sort of something to get your mind around as well.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely way of doing things, and certainly a nice way of setting everyone up for a tough time ahead, a very busy week with very little sleep, no doubt. Do you capture any signs or omens? Obviously, biodynamic farming is very much in touch with nature and the signs that are given to you. But do you notice any signs or omens that potentially may predict the outcome of a harvest?
So, it's a natural product. So you're always working with nature, and you're working with the rhythms that go with that. And sometimes you do have, seasons that aren't as good as they possibly could be. Maybe there's too much rain. Maybe there's a bit of disease that's come in. But ultimately, you've got to take on the year, and that's what the cards that are dealt, and you need to work with that and make the best possible wine that you can. With biodynamics and the way that we farm, you're really working with nature, and you're looking at those rhythms, you're looking at the weather that's coming in, you're looking at what's happening in the vineyard, in the soils, in the canopy, and then you reacting to that. So firstly, obviously proactively, and getting rhythms and sort of using the different biodynamic preps into the farm, getting the rhythm set up like you would want it to be, and then you start reacting in adverse weather conditions or whatever, where you might bring in a couple addition applications of certain preps or whatever to mitigate those negative aspects, and then you run from that. So obviously, there's no silver bullet for curing a thing for us, but if you're getting that correct, it's all about balance in the vineyard, and ultimately coming into the cellar, it's about balance in the cellar as well, balance in the wines, the natural acidities that come through, as I've mentioned earlier, obviously the spontaneous ferments, and bringing that whole process through. And once again, very slow winemaking. So we're not trying to rush it through, get it into the market in a month. Our white wines won't even be released for 2 years. It's as the slowest sort of wine. So it's a very slow process and a very methodical on one side, but more importantly, a very natural process. So just letting nature run its course, and doing what it's supposed to be doing. And in our experience, if you do that, both in the vineyard and in the winery, it really gives you, number one, bright wines that shine, but more importantly, very stable wines, and mitigate a lot of the issues that you might be picking up where you're driven by chemical and sort of those type of applications.
It certainly sounds like patience is key in what you're doing. Johnathan, what did you want to be when you were a little boy?
Well, that's always an interesting question. Actually, I used to, when I was a youngster, I think I was about 6, I had a whole vegetable garden that I used to grow. And I used to sell off all the produce to my mom's friends. So that was, I was a real youngster when that was. And actually, I think that's sort of where the start of my farming background started. And then later on, you go off to school and you get caught in various different other ideas of doing things. And I actually ended up going to study art. So I studied to be a fine artist. I majored in sculpture and oil painting. And then, of course, as things happen, I ended up back on a farm and farming. So sort of full circle almost. But I guess also on the same side, the way that we farm is more artistic, if you like. It's a lot different to a conventional farm where you're using a whole lot of inputs and so on. And I think that's what appeals to me, of course.
I've always said that I think winemaking is like creating art, and then the final product is your showpiece. So it makes perfect sense to see how you've brought the two together. When you're not busy doing all things Avondale, what do you do in your free time?
Geez, that's difficult. There's not much free time. But what I love doing is spending time with my kids and my family. Specifically, I love fishing. So if I get any time on my own, we try to go off to Knysna, where we have a holiday house, and actually go to catch some fish. So that's a good way to relax and just sort of have. What I love about that is that you're relaxing, but at the same time you have a chance of catching an awesome fish. So a bit of action involved. But I also, if I could have my way, I would love to go snow skiing. So that's also that side of things, which is also lots of fun, doing exercise. But more importantly, spending time and quality time with my family. I mean, that's sort of what I love doing. Yeah.
Yeah, balance is key, as they say. Do you support any sports teams? Rugby, tennis players, Formula One?
I do like sport. I think, I'm South African, so we're a sporting nation after all. Rugby is my sport of choice, especially, I guess, the Stormers for my sons, and the Springboks, of course. But the Stormers, when they play decent rugby, is fairly hard to beat. But yeah, rugby, I love it.
And are you into music? Do you have a favorite band or artist, anything like that?
I do like music. At the moment, I tend to listen to most of my daughter's music, which is maybe not that good for me. But I actually, at one stage, I used to play the saxophone, so I love jazz as a sort of a genre, if you like. And yeah, just that side. I love something with a decent beat. That's sort of my side of it. Doesn't really matter if it's jazz or if it's whatever music it is. It just needs to have a proper bass instrument and a proper beat to it, then I'm happy.
I totally echo your sentiments on teenagers and their music tastes. You are subjected to it whether you like it or not. Do you have a all-time favorite movie that just kind of stirs emotions or kind of you just keep going back to?
Geez, that's once again a mixture of genre. If you speak to my wife, I think between my son and myself, we love Transformers. We've watched it definitely too many times, so that's one extreme. But I guess on another side, Dead Poets Society was one of my favorite. I was also in the boarding school, so it was sort of ringing true on one side of that. Yeah, there are just so many movies. I love movies, so it's something that I like to also doing, and sort of gives you for 2 hours or so just to get your mind off things. But yeah, across different genres as well.
If you were to take Mrs. Grieve out for a beautiful romantic evening at a beautiful restaurant, which wine would you pick?
Wow. Okay. I thought you were going to ask which restaurant, and that would have been a no-brainer. But wine would also probably be a no-brainer, but it would definitely be white because Suzanne loves white, and it probably would be a Chenin Blanc. And if I had to be exact, I would choose Anima, my Chenin Blanc. But yeah, I mean that's the way that would go, definitely.
And what was the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Wow, that's a difficult question. I think, just to stay true to who you are. That's the most important, and really just focusing on what not doing too much, but just focusing on what you're good at. But don't vary because of popular belief. But, have a belief and have something that you believe in and go full ball at that. That's what I've done most of my life, but hopefully still a lot to go.
And it seems to be working so far. What would you say is your proudest achievement in terms of your career?
Wow. I guess, one of I used to be exceptionally, how can I say, shy on one side, but I hated public speaking. So it was, I used to get terrified of it. Specifically at school, etc. And one day I was farming quite differently, obviously organic and everywhere down that. And one of the chemical reps came and asked me, who I actually used to talk to a lot about what we were doing and what did he think and so on. And he said, no, I've got this little get together of farmers and I'm wanting you to speak to them about the way that you farm. And I said, no ways, I can't do that. And he kept on coming back to me. And eventually I said to my wife, I said, look here, what do you think? So she said, no, you must go speak. So anyway, long story short, I went and I said, okay, I'm going to do it. Went into the event. Unbeknownst to me, it wasn't a couple of farmers. It was about 250 farmers who were very much chemically driven, so all about fertilizers and sprays. And I was walking in there talking about not using fertilizers and sprays and using cover crops and building organic material and X, Y, and Z. But to me, that was a definite, not a light bulb moment, but a sort of a watershed moment. I guess that's the best way of putting it. That I could stand up and actually speak to people, and I've never looked back since then. It's very easy to speak to about something that you're passionate about, and you've got the knowledge, of course, so that helps. But it's that was an amazing experience in its own right.
Well, I certainly can attest to you telling amazing stories. You really are one of my favorite storytellers in our industry. So I'm very grateful that watershed moment happened for you, that's for sure. A VIP is paparazzi'd at a restaurant and one of your bottles of wine is on the table. Which bottle of wine was on the table when they were photographed, and who is that famous person?
I think it would probably be a toss-up between my Cyclist or my La Luna. So Cyclist is a white blend, and La Luna is a Bordeaux blend, so a red blend. The Cyclist would be Scarlett Johansson, I think, definitely. And the red blend would be Jack Nicholson. How do you say it?
Jack Nicholson.
Nicholson.
Yes. Awesome.
Yes, yeah.
What sort of wines do you think will be drunk in the year 2300? So in 280, say 300 years' time.
I think it will be natural, and I think it will be what we used to drink 1,000 years ago. And I think the modern way of making wines as we do today will fade and continue to fade. So less and less wood, less and less extraction, and become not less powerful, but much more grape driven. So that's my feeling. Yeah.
I like to think the same. I think I'd agree with that. A caveman who was frozen in the Ice Age has thawed on Avondale Wine Farm, and he comes stumbling to your tasting room. He is super thirsty. Which of your wines do you serve him?
So that would be an easy one. I would definitely serve him our Quevry. It's a red blend driven by Grenache, Syrah and Mourvedre. Made in the clay pots, the Georgian Quevries, mostly a whole bunch fermented, lots of skin contact, very elegant. It's sort of Beaujolais in style, so lighter style, lower alcohol. We wouldn't want him getting too drunk too quickly, but more importantly, it's fruit driven, lots of minerality, and I would like to think that he might not have experienced the clay pots in his time, but he could assimilate to it.
I like that so much. Name 3 wines you would take with you to outer space.
Okay, well, obviously I have to pick my own wine, so but I probably would pick my own wines even if I had a choice. I definitely would take one of our Millers, our sparkling wine, or Method Cup Classic. So that, as I mentioned earlier, I can drink just about any time. I think our Samsara, our Syrah, would also be right up there, and then our Nima, our Shannon, would definitely be my 3 choice.
3 very, very good choices. We're almost done. However, before we finish up, I want to play a little game with you. I'm going to give you 3 grape varieties. I'm going to name 3 grape varieties, and you are going to pair them with a song. So you're going to think of which song do you think best pairs with or represents that variety. And the varieties are Grenache Noir, a Marsanne, and a Chenin Blanc.
Yeah, so, I'm worst at naming people's names and let alone songs, but I definitely would go for the Chenin, and it would be a rich Chenin, or a multi-layered Chenin. I would say a Nina Simone, My Baby Don't Care. So that would be my first one that would come to mind. My second, the Grenache Noir would be, that's a difficult one. It would probably be like one of those Katy Perry type of those songs, but I might be wrong. And then what was the third one?
Marsanne.
Okay, Marsanne. Wow. Okay, that would definitely be like one of the, and I don't have a name, but one of the Ibiza type of solid beat. Background music, and really bringing that soul through.
Very nice. I like that combo. Johnathan, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to remind our listeners where they can find Avondale? Give us your website URL and just some parting notes.
Yeah, so you can find a lot of information on our website, including our international sort of outlets and where you can get a hold of our wine. Our website is avondalewine.co.za, so very straightforward. I also have a blog, which can be linked from the website, but it's biologicwine.co.za, which I share a lot of info about how we farm, so the biodynamic way of doing things, how you make the preps, a very practical sort of sharing of knowledge, if you like. So those are the two aspects. Obviously, we have all the various different social media handles that you can get hold of on our website as well. And yeah, that's it from our side. Obviously, I've enjoyed myself. It's always fun talking about, maybe not about myself definitely, but about Avondale. And I would love everybody to come and visit us. If you can't come visit us, try one of our bottles of wine. And really get to know our place in the sun, what we're about, our natural wines. Obviously, they're all organic and very low sulfurs, vegan. What other things do they tick? Delicious. That's the most important part. Thank you, Marina.
Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure chatting to you today. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack South Africa. For details and updates, visit our website winesoundtrack.com.